Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Gamecore. Today I'm excited to show off this new web-based retro gaming service called WebRcade. And this platform will allow you to play all sorts of 8-bit and 16-bit systems directly on a web browser, on your computer, or other things as I'll show later in this video. Now, WebRcade is not a streaming platform in any way. It actually allows you to run your own library via cloud services like DropBox. And this is possible through something that they call a game feed. And we're going to build a game feed here in this video today, and I'm going to show off how all of that is going to work. But essentially, all I'm doing here is I'm pointing this feed to my own games hosted on a DropBox account. And this allows me to safely and securely access my own ROM library, and I can also tailor the options and the browsing experience however I'd like. And when the lead developer reached out to me and said, hey, are you interested in maybe making a video about this service? I said, no way, man, I want to make the video for the service. And that's what we're doing here. We're going to make a full tutorial on how to get this up and running so that you can play your own retro games on just about any browser that you can think of. And WebRcade is 100% open source, and on top of that, it's a work in progress. There's going to be new features added as time marches on. For example, right now they have in-game saves that are available so you can jump in and out of your games, but eventually at some point they're hoping to have cloud saves or even save states. And so you might be thinking, what are the practical implications of a web-based gaming service like this? Like, what is this actually going to mean? Well, in practical terms, this means that you're going to be able to play retro games on systems that typically wouldn't allow you to do that without some further work. For example, all the footage that you've seen up to now has actually been via the Microsoft Edge browser on my Xbox. And so without having to install anything or use dev mode on my Xbox, I'm able to access my entire Super Nintendo, Nintendo, Game Boy Advance library all in one. And on top of that, I can access this same library on various other platforms as well. For example, I can jump onto the iPhone and do the exact same thing. I can even make a web app that'll allow me to just access it like any other app. And so I imagine if you're an Xbox or an iPhone user, you're probably getting pretty excited right now because this means you can access all of your game library without having to install anything. And as I've shown in previous videos, playing retro games on an iPhone is kind of a pain in the butt. And this simplifies the entire process and gives you the ability to tailor it to whatever needs you have as well. Alright, so I think I've set the stage of everything that WebRcade is going to be able to do, so now let's actually dive in and do it. So without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, we're going to start with the WebRcade website itself. This is just webarcade.com. And there are three sections here. There's the Play, Build, and Docs. Under Play, this is where you're going to go and play your games. Build is where you would build those feeds in order to load up your games. And then the Docs is just going to show you all the documentation you need outside of this video. So quickly going over the features here, as you can see it plays on any number of different browsers, and the games run natively inside the browser. These are not being streamed in any way, and so because of that your internet connection does not matter at all. On top of that, this has full gamepad support either via USB or Bluetooth. And of course you're able to create your own feeds, and they have a very handy feed editor which walks you through that whole process. And even though right now they have the 16-bit and below systems, there are plans for others as well in the future, things like Nintendo 64. So if we jump into the Play section, you can see there's a default example feed already, and this is pulling from all sorts of freeware and homebrew games. And if anything, this will give you a pretty good indication of what to expect once you've built your own feed library using your own games. But for now, let's just load up a game so you can see what it's like. This one's called Blade Buster. This is a homebrew game that looks a little bit like Aleste from the MSX originally. And as you can see, it's a very seamless experience. It's very easy to navigate through and choose your games and even get back to the browser and everything else. So to navigate back in the menus, all you have to do is just click on this text right above the thumbnails. So let's go all the way back to the feed section. And as you see here, it has the default theme, which we're running right now. But what we want to do is create our own feed and load it into the browser. So now we're going to go into the other section of this website, into the build section. And this is what they call the feed editor. And to start, it shows you the default feed, and this just kind of gives you an idea of what it's going to look like once it's fully formed. So within here, we can click on the item count to get into the individual games. And from this feed editor, we can actually load up the games to make sure they work. Or we can go into the edit section and modify some of its parameters. You can even see where the game is hosted on the web, as well as where the thumbnail and background images are hosted too. And that gives you an idea of how this is all organized. Your game is hosted on an external website, same thing with your images. So I think the easiest way to kind of wrap our heads around it is just to make our own example feed. So let's do that first. We're going to go up here and click on New. And if you wanted, you could start with an example feed, or you could clone the default one. We're just going to start from scratch with an empty feed. Okay, so here we are. It's very simple. Let's go ahead and change the name of our feed and some of the descriptors here. And none of this is set in stone, so you can change this at any time if you'd like. We're just going to worry about the text right now, but you could add a thumbnail and background, and I'll do that a little bit later here in this video. But for now, we've got the name of our feed. Let's go ahead and add some categories. So you want to go into the category section here, and it already has a blank new category here, so let's go ahead and edit this one to make it our own. I'm going to make this one Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and again, I'm not going to worry about the thumbnail and background just yet. And so let's make another category too. Let's do NES this time. So now that we've made some categories, let's add some games to it. You just click on the 0 here next to the item count. And this is our Game Boy Color category. Now if you wanted, you could just press the plus sign and then add games individually here, but you'd have to type in every little thing, and that would probably get a little bit annoying over time. But essentially, if you wanted to do it from scratch, this is the way to do it. But there are some easier ways, so let me show you those. Over here, you have two different options. You can create from URLs or you can add from DropBox. When you create from URLs, you literally would just paste in the URL of wherever your game is hosted, and it'll scrape all the other information for you. But I found that adding it from my personal Dropbox account is even easier. Now, of course, I've already set up my Dropbox account and I've also added all of my different game folders, so you'd have to do that first. But once you have that set up, you can go into any of your folders and then import the games. So we're working on Game Boy and Game Boy Color, so let's import our Game Boy games first. Now it'll take a few seconds to analyze all of the games. It's going to import all of the box art as well as all the descriptions. And the key thing here is to make sure that you're using very clean ROM titles so that the editor can pick up on all of them. As you can see here, all 15 of my Game Boy games were imported correctly. So it has thumbnails and the correct titles and everything. If we go into any of these, we can actually select Edit, and you can see that all of the information is correct. Now under the Properties tab, you can see it's already imported the URL of my game, and then I also have a couple different emulator options down below. For example, I could emulate different hardware types, like plugging a Game Boy into a Game Boy Advance. On top of that, I have different screen colors that I can adjust with Game Boy in particular, so I have Greenscale and Super Game Boy. And then each of these different colors also have different palettes. So for example, under the Greenscale one, you can see you have some lovely palettes here. And on top of that, some Game Boy games support the Super Game Boy borders, so you could add those as well. And of course, the thumbnails and backgrounds have already been imported too. So if we boot up this game here, as you can see, it's now saved that specific green palette for this one game. And that'll persist throughout any of the other systems that I use to access this game. So let's do a couple other games so you can kind of get an idea of the different properties we have here. For example, if we edit Tetris and we change the screen colors to Super Game Boy, you can see there's a ton of different palettes here. We're going to stick with the default one here. And then when I play the game, as you can see, it runs using that palette. And of course, you can change these as you'd like. Another example is going to be Donkey Kong. This one's going to allow you to use a Super Game Boy border. So I'm going to set everything to Super Game Boy, pick my palette, and then turn the border on. And look at that, we now have this pretty cool border around our Game Boy game. Of course, this is all going to be personal preference, and you may not want to change any of these, but the option is there if you want it. So let's do one more here. Let's add in the NES. Same thing here, we're going to add into our Dropbox, go into our NES folder, select all of our NES games, and it's going to import everything, including the description, the thumbnails, as well as the background. And there we go, we've got all of my 32 NES games loaded up already. And of course, if you want to test, you can always just press play and make sure that the game runs correctly. Okay, I'm going to run you through one more time really quickly, just so we get the hang of it. We're going to do Super Nintendo this time. And again, we're not worrying about the thumbnails and backgrounds, we're just loading up the games. We're going to add it from our Dropbox, go into our Dropbox folder, grab our SNES folder, and then import all of our games. If you've already got a game library and you don't mind creating a Dropbox account, you could have a feed up and running in about 20 minutes. It's that easy. And of course, you can add and delete games as you'd like, so this isn't just a one and done thing, you can continue to tweak this over time. And one other thing to note is these categories are not limited to just one specific platform. So for example, I have both Game Boy and Game Boy Colors in the same folder. And so I'm going to add my Game Boy Color games right now, even though I have an existing Game Boy library in there too. What this means is that you could create categories based on genre. For example, you could have all of your racing games or role-playing games all in just one category. So you have complete freedom to make whatever categories you want. I'm just going to stick with system just because I like to navigate that way. So now that we've created a bare bones feed, let's go ahead and test it out. First thing you have to do is hit the save button. That's going to save a copy within your browser, and then you can select test. And of course, it's not very fancy right now. We don't have any nice thumbnails and backgrounds for our systems, but if we go into an individual system, as you can see here, all of that game art is there because that was already imported. And if we navigate back to the main section here and we look at the feeds, as you can see, it has my feed here. It's stored as a local copy right now. And of course, you can change the thumbnail and background on this one too. So let's actually do that next. We're going to make each of our categories a little bit prettier. We'll start with Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Now the thing about the thumbnail and background, they need to be hosted on the web somewhere. You can't just drag in a picture. And so as you can see here, I've made a thumbnail and I've loaded it up into Imgur. And so all I have to do is just copy the address of the image that I've uploaded here and then paste it back into the feed editor. One thing to note is thumbnails need to be 400 by 300 in size. So that's really about it. All you have to do is make some images that are 400 by 300 and then copy those image addresses and then paste them into the feed editor. And I recommend using Imgur just because it's a very easy service to use. And all you have to do now is just save your feed and then we can test it. And as you see on the screen, we have all of our thumbnails now, but we don't have any backgrounds yet. So let's do those next. Personally, I found that the best backgrounds are going to be coming from emulation station themes. So as you see, I'm using this one here. And I've just dug into their GitHub page and I found a bunch of different JPEGs that are associated with different systems. And it's as simple as just dragging your image into your Imgur post. Now for some reason it makes two, so you want to delete one of the images. And so what I've done is I've added just a few different backgrounds here, which I can then add to the feed editor. And so same process here. We're going to copy the image address, we're going to go and edit the category, and then we're going to paste that into the background image. And this one is not limited by a specific size, so you can use whatever you want. It's going to scale it down. And yeah, same process here. We're just going to paste it in here really quickly. And of course, you can always edit this later on too if you don't want to do it right then and there. Either way, once you're done, go ahead and save your feed and then we can test it. And look at how nice and beautiful that looks. So now really we're just missing one thing, and that is the game descriptions. We didn't add those initially. So I found the easiest thing to do is actually just copy and paste the first paragraph from Wikipedia for each of these. And so same thing here, we can edit the category and we can actually copy and paste into the description. And even easier than that, you can actually just drag and drop. Now if you pull from Wikipedia, you're probably going to want to take out the reference citations like this A here, but other than that, it's a really simple process to import this data. And so yeah, that's basically all you need to do is just do that for each of the systems. And this is what it'll look like once you've imported the descriptions. For Super Nintendo, I left the citations in so you can see how weird it looks, but overall this looks very nice. In fact, I think it's time to share this with the world. So what we're going to do now is we're going to save the feed one last time. And then what we want to do is export our feed into a simple JSON file. I would recommend using a very simple name for this. Like for example, I'm going to take the apostrophe out of my name, and I'm also going to replace the spaces with dashes just to make things simple. And so if we open up the JSON file, you can see it's basically just a text file that has all the data that we've already imported, including the descriptions and the URLs for the images and the ROMs themselves. Now there's a couple different things we could do with this JSON file to get it to work in WebRcade, but personally I like to use DropBox since I already have my games there too. So all I'm going to do is upload this JSON file into my Dropbox folder. And here it is right here. And so now all I have to do is copy the link of this JSON file and then get it ready to be used in WebRcade. Now if you look at the WebRcade documents section, it does say that if you're going to use Dropbox as your feed host, you do have to do a couple different changes to the URL itself in order to make it compatible with WebRcade. So let's do that now. We're going to paste this into a text document here. And it's actually super simple. All you have to do is remove the $DL equals 0. And then instead of the word Dropbox, you need to change this to dl.dropboxusercontent. And yeah, that's kind of weird, but you only have to do this one time. Now that we have a working URL, let's go ahead and make it a little bit shorter and easier to remember. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it into tiny.cc. And this is just a URL shortener service. And this is totally free too. I'm going to change it to tiny.cc/rgc-feed. And there we go, that is now the URL of my feed for my personal ROM collection. And so now if we go into WebRcade and we select play, and we go back into the feed section, and these are all just test feeds, so don't worry about them here, but what we're going to do is click on URL, and then we're going to type in the full URL of our shortened feed. And just like that, it's loaded up our little feed. So now all I have to do is just use this URL on various platforms, for example on my laptops or my home computer or even my Xbox and iPhone, and it's going to allow me to access my entire game library. Now before you get any sort of crazy ideas, I am going to take this URL down before I post this video, so you're not going to be able to access my games. I'm going to change the URL here in a minute. But for now, you get an idea of how this all works, right? And so the other part of it too is that you can update this on the fly. For example, if we want to add in Genesis games here, we're going to do the same process. We're going to add them from Dropbox. And I'm going super fast through this because we've already done this 3 times at this point. But once I've imported all my Genesis games, I'm good to go. So for example, I can save my feed, and then I can export it and I'll overwrite my other JSON file. And then back in Dropbox, I'll just go and re-upload that same JSON file. And it's going to replace that file, but keep the same URL, which means that all of my links are going to work across the board. So now if I go back into WebRcade and I reload my feed, it's going to update to all the changes I've made. For example, as you can see now, I now have my Genesis library. And of course I need to add my background and thumbnail and everything else, but all the same, it works. And so this is a way to continue to maintain your feed over time. So let me show you the practical implications of this. Here's my iPhone here. I'm going to go into Safari. I'm going to open up WebRcade. And of course, it's the same user interface as we saw earlier on my computer. For example, here's that same default feed. But now what I want to do is add my own feed. So I'm going to go into the URL section. I'm going to type in my tiny.cc/rgc tag feed. And just like that, I've loaded up that same exact feed on a completely different platform. No need to install anything at all. And that is super exciting to me. Now let's make this a web app so it actually shows up on our home screen. What you want to do is press that up arrow in Safari and then select Add to Home Screen. And you can name it whatever you'd like. But as you can see, it shows up as its own app icon like that. And so now we can just tap on it and immediately have access to our own feed. And so it's basically an app that works for your specific iPhone. And of course, this has full controller support. Here's my Backbone 1, my favorite controller for iOS. I had to get a 3D printed adapter from Backbone in order to get my iPhone 13 Pro to work, but as you can see, it works just great. And so if you want to sit down and spend about 20 minutes making a feed, you can have access to it wherever you want, and that includes on your iPhone or other platforms too. You can throw it on your laptop that you're going to take around on a business trip, and you didn't hear this from me, but you could even use this on your browser at work. And so to me, this is a really exciting prospect. I'm able to play my favorite classic and retro games without having to install anything on my phone or anything else. This is all just running through the web. You don't have to have any knowledge about emulation or anything else like that. You just have to build that feed. And right now, this supports local in-game saves, but they are working on save states as well as the opportunity to maybe do cloud saving in the future. That means that you can pick up one game on one platform and then resume it on another. And that might be a ways off, but all the same, that's super exciting that they're interested in doing that in the first place. Okay, let's move on to a totally different platform, but do the exact same process. Here I am with my Xbox Series S, and I'm going to run everything through the Edge browser. If you've never used the Edge browser, it's already installed on your Xbox in the Apps section. Now there is a couple things you have to do in order to make the browser work properly with WebRcade. So you have to go up here to the top right, go into Settings, and then select the System Settings here. And so two things you want to do here. First thing, make sure that the hardware acceleration is turned on. I think it is on by default. And then go into this Hide Border section here. And then on the bottom right, it says Apps can add a border. Make sure to leave this unchecked. I think it's actually checked by default, so you'll want to turn that one off. After that, go ahead and load up WebRcade. And then go into the Play section like we did before. And this is going to load up that default theme, which is full of freeware games and everything else. Now to make it full screen, you want to press the Select or the View button on your Xbox. And unfortunately, there is a bug in the browser. And so what you have to do here when you go into full screen is you have to tap the Xbox button twice. And it's just a weird bug that you have to do when you go in and out of full screen. Now to use a controller for navigation with your Xbox, what you want to do is press the Start button and then select Use Game Controls. And that's really about it. All you have to do is set it to full screen and then turn it onto game controls, and just like that, you can browse their entire library. Now, this is the default theme, like I said before, and you can access this at any time. So even if you don't make your own feed, you can go into WebRcade via your Xbox Edge browser, and you can actually just test out these games to make sure this is something that you're interested in doing in the first place. So now let's add our own feed. So same process here. We're going to go into that feed section. We're going to go into the URLs and we're going to type in the URL of our tiny.cc/rgc tag feed. And just like that, we've loaded that exact same feed library into the Xbox now. So now I have it running on my home computer, my iPhone, and my Xbox in a matter of about 20 minutes. And so here we go. Let's go ahead and test out a game here and make sure it works okay. Let's go ahead and use Donkey Kong because we added that border here a minute ago. And as you can see, those options are going to persist across all of your different platforms. Now, one note here, what I'm going to do for the rest of this video here is I'm going to go into the URL and I'm going to add a question mark debug equals 1. And so I'm basically going to run WebRcade in debug mode. What that means on the top left, you're going to see the frames per second and some other data too. And it's probably not super important because all these games run perfectly, but I do want to show off that they do run at 60 frames per second for all of these systems. And so yeah, just like that, I'm playing retro games on my Xbox with very little effort. And of course, if you're going to be playing retro games, I recommend using the 8BitDo Xbox controller. I showed this one off in a video a week or two ago. This is a really great controller for playing retro games on an Xbox. Because let's face it, the Xbox controller kind of sucks in that regard. Okay, so off screen, what I did is I made a couple different changes to the feed. So what happens now is if I reload the feed, it's going to show all of those updates. So for example, I've added Game Boy Advance and I've added the graphics for Sega Genesis as well. And so that's one of my favorite things about WebRcade is that it gets better over time. You can spend a few minutes here and there adding new games, adding new graphics, whatever you want to do. And all you got to do is just export that new JSON file, upload it to DropBox, and then reload your feed. And I think that's probably one of the biggest strengths of WebRcade is that it gives you the freedom to basically have your own game library on your own terms. And so, for example, if a certain game looks better with a specific colorization, you can adjust that in the feed and then it's going to work across all of your different platforms. And some of these are a work in progress. For example, with Game Boy Color, the saturation to me is just a little bit too much. But I've talked to the developer and they're going to look into adding a color correction option within the emulator. So that's going to give you the option to tone down the colors just a little bit. Either way, the game runs nice and smooth as you see here. And so across the board, if you want to play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Master System, Genesis, and even some of the older ones like Atari 2600 or 7200. All of those are fully functional within the feed. It really is going to depend on what you want to play. And on top of that, the developers have big plans to add things like TurboGrafx 16, Neo Geo Pocket Color, Nintendo 64, and so on. And so when it comes down to it, sky's the limit. This is going to allow you to play these classic systems without having to do any sort of installations. And I've tested out other browser-based opportunities like this, but I found that a lot of those have different quirks to them. For example, some of them are streaming-based, which means that the performance is going to be affected by your internet connection. And some of the other ones are not quite as user-friendly, and from what I've seen, none of the other ones have the ability to use a user-generated feed that you can share on the fly. And so overall, I'm just really impressed with the WebRcade system. The user interface is nice and intuitive, and I love the idea of playing my own game library on multiple platforms at once. And last note here, WebRcade also supports the Doom engine, so if you want to play classic Doom games on your iPhone, your Xbox, or your web browser, you can do all that right here and there. Okay, so wrapping up here, I just want to make note that the WebRcade features are going to improve over time. This is literally the day that WebRcade is debuting. But they have all the tools in place to improve things in the future. For example, everything's hosted up on GitHub, they have their own Discord server, and so you have several different ways of requesting new features or even adding in trouble tickets if you're having an issue. Overall, the entire platform has been really well thought out, and I think you're going to be taken care of in the future. And on top of that, the WebRcade docs page is one of the best I've ever seen for any platform. It has a fully fledged user guide, complete with screenshots and videos. It also can walk you through the various platforms that can play WebRcade, as well as how to get all of the various systems working on your feed. On top of that, it shows you how to navigate the feeds as well as to use the editor. And like I mentioned before, Dropbox is only one of many ways that you can host your files. For example, you could just go to the Internet Archive and then pull the URLs directly from there, as they give you an example with some of the homebrew collections available online. And so, at the end of the day, I'm a huge fan of WebRcade. I love the fact that this basically allows me to recreate my childhood gaming experience on my phone or my Xbox or just on a random laptop. And on top of that, I love the fact that this is super secure and it allows me to use my own game library so I don't have to depend on any sort of shady resources out there on the web. I love the idea of just 100% using my own stuff. So let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm pretty excited to show off this thing, but I also want to see what you guys think about it too. And the timing for this couldn't be better because we just had a scare last week about Xbox potentially removing dev mode. It turns out it was a big mistake, but all the same, this is the first thing I thought about was, well, at least I can still play all my classic games via WebRcade on the Xbox. And so if you're not interested in doing the whole dev mode thing, this might be a great alternative if you just want to focus on classic games. And as soon as they get Nintendo 64 up and running, I'll be sure to share that as well because I'm super excited about that one too. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.